Skyrim was built long before it was settled, a land where stone and timber would tell the story of survival against ice and wind. The early Atmaran settlements prioritized function over form, using whatever stone was available to them. These were practical people, building for necessity rather than beauty, letting the harsh landscape dictate their choices. Nordic buildings came to dominate the surface settlements, and if you look closely, you'll notice their steep, snow-shedding roofs. This wasn't decoration. This was survival, ensuring that heavy snowfall would slide away rather than collapse the structures beneath. Stone foundations paired with timber framing evoked the Viking longhouses of old. There's something timeless about this combination, something that connects these Nord builders to seafaring ancestors from distant shores. The Nord longhouses themselves stack round posts with horizontal lintels, a construction method both sturdy and elegant in its simplicity. Each piece supports the next, creating structures that have weathered centuries. The Jarl longhouses maintain bilateral symmetry around their central hearths. Walk into one of these great halls and you'll find balance, order, a reflection of Nordic values built into the very walls. Speaking of those great halls, they drape their walls with layered wool tapestries for insulation. Beauty and function merge here, as intricate designs also trap warmth against the cold stone. In the highlands, roofs steepen progressively upward, much like the Norwegian stave buildings they resemble. The higher you climb, the sharper the angles become, as if reaching toward the mountain peaks themselves. Longhouse walls often layer sod over stone bases, combining materials in a way that provides both structural integrity and additional insulation against Skyrim's bitter winds. The Merethic tombs, ancient beyond reckoning, slot black granite together without mortar, stone against stone, fitted so precisely that even after thousands of years they stand firm. And those ancient barrows incorporate solstice-aligned ocular skylights, showing that even in death, the ancient Nords honor the sun's journey across the sky, marking time's passage with light and shadow. As Skyrim organized itself, architecture became identity. What had been simple survival evolved into something more, a reflection of who these people were and who they aspired to be. Skyrim divides into 9 holds, each one reflecting the geography and culture of its region. Travel from the volcanic tundra of Eastmarch to the autumn forest of the Rift, and you'll see how landscape shapes the buildings, how climate dictates design, how local resources become local character. These holds balance urban hubs with rural outposts, creating networks of civilization that spread across the wilderness. The cities serve as hearts, pumping life and commerce out to the smaller settlements, the farms, the mills, the mines at the countryside. Each outpost connects back to its whole capital, part of a larger whole. The cities themselves emphasize fortifications, drawbridges that can be raised against invaders, watchtowers that pierce the skyline, watching for threats from every direction, elevated palaces that announce authority from above, positioning the Jarl's seat where it can overlook and protect. These aren't just decorative choices, they're statements. They say, we have survived and we will continue to survive. Walk through any major city and you'll notice how layouts form quadrants or central hubs for navigation. There's an intentional logic to the design, even when the streets seem to wind. Main thoroughfares lead to key districts. Marketplaces serve as gathering points. Everything radiates from somewhere, connects to something. You can find your way because the city was built to be understood. City blueprints adapt pre-existing terrain, rather than fighting against it. Markarth clings to its cliff face because the Dwemer ruins were already there. Solitude crowns its stone arch because that arch provided natural defense. Windhelm's ancient walls follow the contours of land, working with the rock rather than against it. The smartest builders know when to let the earth guide them. These dense cities balance unique assets, NPCs, and code demands in ways that aren't always visible. Every building serves a purpose, not just for people who live there, but for the living world itself. Shops cluster near gates for arriving travelers. Homes spread through districts to create neighborhoods. Temples and halls occupy prominent positions. It's a careful choreography of space and function, creating the illusion of organic growth while maintaining deliberate structure. Each hold capital tells you where you are the moment you enter. The gray stone of Windhelm speaks of ancient times and older ways. Whiterun's wooden buildings clustered on its hills suggest a newer settlement, still growing. still reaching upward. Solitude's blue-roof grandeur announces imperial influence and coastal wealth. Riffin's walkways over water reveal adaptation to marshland terrain. You could close your eyes, open them in any city, and know immediately which hole claims you. The rural outposts echo their parent cities, but on intimate scales. A farmhouse in Whiterun Hold carries the same timber-heavy construction as the city itself, just simpler, more practical. A mining camp in the Reach shows Markartha's stoneworking tradition in miniature. These outlying structures aren't afterthoughts. They're the holds extending themselves, maintaining identity even at the edges of civilization. Watchtowers deserve their own consideration. They stand as sentinels across Skyrim, marking roads, guarding passes, overlooking valleys. Some belong to holds, some to the Empire, some to neither anymore. But they all share certain features: height for visibility, strength for defense, beacon fires for communication, a network of stone guardians, watching, always watching. The fortification philosophy extends beyond walls and towers. Even in peacetime, Skyrim cities remain ready for war. Gates can seal, bridges can raise. High ground provides advantage. Every city remembers sieges past and anticipates sieges future. This is a land where peace is temporary and preparedness is permanent. But within those fortifications, life flourishes. Markets bustle. Forges ring with hammer strikes. Children play in the streets. The architecture creates safety, and within that safety, community thrives. The walls don't just keep dangers out. They hold something precious in. Every city tells you who rules there. The architecture doesn't just house power. It announces it, displays it, makes it impossible to ignore. Let's begin with Whiterun, where everything leads upward. Whiterun's tiered plains layout centers on Dragon's Reach, and there's no mistaking this. From the moment you pass through the main gate, your eye travels up those ascending levels, past the Wind District, through the Cloud District, always climbing toward that great hall crowning the city. It's a design that makes you work for an audience with a Jarl, that reminds you with every step that you're approaching power. And Dragon's Reach itself, look closely at those bridge arches. They mimic dragon ribs. This is deliberate, a monument to the ancient Nord who captured Numinex, who bent a dragon to his will. The architecture literally embodies that triumph, turning bone and scale into stone and timber, so that every visitor walks beneath the ribcage of defeat. Now travel east of Windhelm, where history weighs heavy on every street. Windhelm is Skyrim's oldest city, dating back to the Merethic era, when Iskramor himself founded it. You can feel that age in the stones, in the way the city seems to have grown from the earth rather than been built upon it. This isn't just old. This is ancient, a living relic of the first human settlements in Skyrim. Interestingly, Windhelm incorporates more wood than later Nordic cities, a reminder of those earliest building traditions before stone became the dominant material. You'll see timber reinforcing walls, wooden walkways bridging spaces, a kind of architectural evolution frozen in place. The city shows its age through these older construction methods, holding on to techniques that other holds abandoned. But perhaps most telling are Windhelm's dead-end streets, which create a sense of claustrophobia and social division. The Grey Quarter, especially, feels deliberately segregated, cut off, trapped. Whether this was original intent or evolved over time, the layout enforces separation, turns neighborhoods into isolated pockets. The architecture reflects and reinforces the social hierarchies, the prejudices, the divisions that plague the city. Those memorial stone walls throughout Windhelm gain remarkable clarity in high-resolution texture overhauls, revealing inscriptions and weathering that speak to centuries of history. Every chip, every worn rune, tells a story if you look closely enough. West now, to Solitude, where everything speaks of empire. Solitude features Northern Empire architecture, a hybrid style that adapts imperial grandeur to Nordic climate. The blue-tiled roofs, unknown elsewhere in Skyrim, announce foreign influence. The archways, the columns, the symmetry, these are imperial signatures written across a Nordic city. Solitude doesn't just serve the empire, it embodies it. The layout emphasizes linear procession to the keep, and this tells you everything about imperial thinking. You enter through that magnificent gate in the stone arch, and the main street carries you directly toward the Blue Palace. No wandering, no confusion. The path to power is straight, obvious, ordained. This is architecture as ceremony, as statement. Solitude's design reflects imperial diplomacy in every corner. The open market near the entrance welcomes trade. The Bard's College suggests culture and refinement. The Temple of the Divines displays proper religious devotion. Everything is positioned to impress visitors, to demonstrate that solitude represents civilization, order, the benefits of imperial rule. Even the buildings seem to stand at attention. South to Rift End, where things get more interesting, more complicated. Rift End pioneered South Nordic revival after its fire, rebuilding itself with style that would influence the entire region. What emerged from those ashes was something distinctly Rift End: dark wood, peaked roofs, a certain maritime character borrowed from trade connections. The city became a trendsetter through catastrophe. That roundabout market in Riffin's center encourages trade flow in clever ways. Merchants arrange themselves around the perimeter, creating a natural circulation pattern. Shoppers move from stall to stall, drawn around the circle, exposed to every vendor. It's designed to maximize commerce, to keep money flowing, which makes perfect sense of a city where the Thieves' Guild holds invisible power. The Plankside district funnels players toward the Ratway with architectural inevitability. The walkways narrow, the buildings press closer, the light dims. By the time you reach those lower levels, you feel the descent into Riffin's underbelly. The legitimate city above gives way to the city below, and the architecture guides you down into the darkness. Weather dramatically changes Riffin's mood in ways unique among Skyrim cities. In autumn sunshine, the oranges and reds of surrounding forests reflect off those dark wooden buildings, creating warmth, suggesting prosperity. But in rain and fog, in the gray days, Rift End transforms. The same buildings become oppressive, sinister, perfectly suited to a city where corruption runs deep. The architecture responds to light and weather like a living thing. Finally, west of Markarth, the strangest city of them all. Markarth is carved directly into Dwemer stone cliffs, and this single fact defines everything about it. This isn't a city built so much as revealed, excavated, reclaimed. The Dwemer created these structures thousands of years ago, and the Nords simply moved in, adapted, made homes and halls designed by a vanished race. Walking through Markarth means walking through layers of time. Those walkways prioritize spectacle over logic, winding up and around in ways that seem to defy practical navigation. You climb stairs to reach lower levels. You descend to find yourself higher up. The city plays tricks with elevation, with perspective, but there's method here. The paths showcase the waterfalls, frame views of surrounding cliffs, turn navigation itself into a kind of architectural tour. Understone keeps arches twist asymmetrically in pure Dwemer fashion. Nothing quite lines up the way Nordic or imperial architecture would demand. Angles feel slightly wrong, proportions seem inhuman, because they're inhuman. They were designed by a race whose aesthetic sense operated on different principles, and Markarth preserves that alien quality. The textures throughout Markarth draw from Mayan and Old Nordic ruins, creating a visual language that speaks of ancient civilizations and lost knowledge. The geometric patterns, the weathered stone, the sense of archaeological depth. Markarth looks like something that should be studied, preserved, treated as a monument. Instead, people live here, work here, bleed here. The ancient becomes everyday. Each of these cities announces its ruler through stone and timber. Whiterun's Jarl commands from his Dragon Arch Hall. Windhelm's ancient throne room echoes with Iskermore's legacy. Solitude's Blue Palace proclaims imperial authority. Riffin's Jarl sits above the corruption below. Markarth's keep nestles in Dwemer glory. The architecture doesn't just house power. It shapes it, displays it, makes it impossible to mistake who rules and what they value. Before Skyrim belonged to Nords, it belonged to engineers. The Dwemer, the Deep Elves, the Dwarves, whatever name you give them, they shaped this land with principles that still baffle scholars today. Dwemer architecture uses stone and brass-like metal in combinations that shouldn't work, but do. The metal gleams even after millennia, resistant to tarnish, to corrosion, to time itself, paired with stone that seems almost fused to it. The Dwemer created structures that feel less built and forged, hammered into existence by some fundamental process we've lost the knowledge to replicate. These ruins are powered by steam, gears, and soul gems, creating a technological infrastructure that still functions long after its creators vanished. Walk through any Dwemer ruin and you'll hear it. The hiss of steam through ancient pipes, the grinding of gears that haven't stopped turning in thousands of years, the hum of soul gems providing power to mechanisms whose purposes we can only guess at. They built machines that outlived them, that continue their work in empty halls. But here's where it gets truly strange. Dwemer structures harness tonal architecture instead of magicka. They didn't cast spells. They resonated reality. Sound, frequency, vibration. These were their tools. They discovered that the world itself could be manipulated through precise tones, through harmonics, through acoustic principles that treat existence as a kind of music. Their buildings don't just stand. They sing at frequencies most ears can't hear. Kagrenzo was a tonal research site, dubbed by some scholars as Music City. Of all the Dwemer ruins scattered across Skyrim, Kagrenzo represents their most ambitious tonal experiments. The entire complex was designed around sound manipulation, around testing the limits of what vibration could achieve. Every chamber, every passage, calibrated for acoustic properties. That great orb in Kagrenzo scans entrance via sonic magic, analyzing them through sound waves in ways that modern magic can't replicate. Stand before it, and you're being measured, categorized, judged by frequencies bouncing through your very being. It's not looking at you. It's listening to you, hearing the fundamental resonance of your existence. And then, having heard enough, it acts. The embedded bones throughout Kagrenzo and the periodic quakes hint at snow whale experiments. The Dwemer apparently captured these creatures, studied them, perhaps tried to harness their natural acoustic abilities. Snow whales navigate through sound, communicate across vast distances through deep vibrations. To the Dwemer, they must have seemed like living tonal instruments, worthy of study, of experimentation, of integration into their grand acoustic theories. Deep below the surface, Blackreach connects multiple Dwemer cities underground. This isn't just a cave system. It's an entire subterranean civilization, a world beneath the world. Cities linked by roads you can still walk, watchtowers still standing guard over farms that once fed thousands, architecture that mirrors the surface but exists in perpetual twilight. Blackreach reveals the true scope of Dwemer ambition. They didn't just build in Skyrim. They built another Skyrim, hidden beneath the first. The structures down there, the towers and bridges and great halls, all exist in that strange Dwemer aesthetic. Geometric, precise, inhuman in their perfection. Walking through Blackreach feels like walking through a dream of order, of rationality taken to its logical extreme. Everything calculated, everything intentional, nothing left to chance or whim. Travel from one Dwemer ruin to another, and you'll notice progressive decay stages. Some remain almost pristine, as if the Dwemer left yesterday. Others have collapsed into rubble, time finally claiming what Dwemer engineering resisted for so long. Enshu and Zell beneath Markarth maintains most of its structural integrity. Zulf shows more weathering, more breakdown. Alftan reveals halls where ceiling collapse has rewritten the geography. But even in ruins, even in decay, the Dwemer presence dominates. Their architecture doesn't gracefully age into romantic ruins like Nordic barrows do. It breaks, it fails, but it fails on its own terms, maintaining that geometric precision even in destruction. A collapsed Dwemer bridge still shows the mathematical ratios that went into its design. A shattered wall reveals the layers of construction, the way they built redundancy into everything. The steam systems fail in stages too. Some ruins still have full pressure, steam venting from pipes, heat radiating from ancient boilers. Others show partial function, occasional bursts of steam, intermittent power. The oldest ruins have gone cold, their boilers silent, their pipes dry, but the infrastructure remains waiting, as if the right technician could restore it all with proper maintenance. Those soul gems embedded throughout Dwemer architecture continue to glow, continue to power what devices still function. The Dwemer discovered how to make soul gems last, to draw energy from them sustainably rather than exhaustively. Or perhaps they created so many, seeded their city so thoroughly with power sources, that millennia later were still depleting their reserves. Either way, The lights haven't gone out. The deep elves may have vanished, but their cities remember being alive. The gears still turn in places, serving functions we don't understand. Some clearly operated doors, elevators, bridges, but others, they connect to nothing visible. Drive mechanisms that have no apparent purpose, maintain rhythms whose meaning died with their creators. Perhaps they're monitoring systems, perhaps experimental apparatus, perhaps art. We walk through Dwemer ruins like archaeologists in a factory we can't comprehend, surrounded by machines still performing tasks we can't name. Before Skyrim belonged to Nords, it belonged to engineers who thought in frequencies and built an eternity. Their cities outlasted them. Their machines outlasted them. Their mysteries outlasted them. And somewhere in those brass halls, in those geometric chambers, in those tonal resonances, the Dweemers still echo, audible to those who know how to listen. Nature and corruption reclaim the ruins. What the Dweemer abandoned, what the Nords left behind. Nothing stays empty forever. Something always moves in, adapts, transforms, makes the old spaces serve new purposes. The Falmer hives show this most dramatically as they adapt Dweemer ruins with fungi and silk bridges. These weren't designed spaces. These were conquered spaces, transformed by a blind people into something that serves their needs. The geometric precision of Dweemer architecture becomes organic, overgrown. Fungi sprout from brass pipes, bioluminescent growths replacing the soul gem lighting. Silk bridges span chasms of Dweemer, once crossed with metal walkways. Sticky strands woven between structures never meant to support them. Walk through a Falmer-occupied ruin, and you see two civilizations layered atop each other, neither quite erasing the other. The Dweemer infrastructure remains, the bones of the place, but the Falmer have clothed it in something alive, pulsing, growing. They nest in chambers designed for metallurgy or astronomy or whatever purposes the deep elves pursued. They've turned laboratories into lairs, libraries into feeding grounds. The corruption is thorough but not complete. You can still see what these places were, beneath what they become. The Falmer don't build, exactly. They infest. They colonize. Their architecture, if you can call it that, consists of adaptation rather than construction. They hang things, web things, cluster things. Their settlements spread like mold through the Dweemer bones, following the existing structure while fundamentally changing its character. Brass and stone become supports for organic growths that pulse with their own disease life. Above ground. In the Reach, the Forsworn tell a different story of reclamation. Forsworn tends to display Briarheart ritual tools with an unsettling casualness. These aren't hidden, secret spaces. The implements of their dark magic sit openly among cooking pots and bedrolls. Ritual knives alongside eating utensils. Reagents for heart replacement ceremonies next to food stores. The Forsworn don't separate the sacred from the mundane. Their camps blur the line between living space and ritual space, between home and altar. Their tent arrangements seem haphazard, but follow their own logic. They cluster around Dweemer ruins they've claimed, around ancient Nordic structures they've repurposed. The Forsworn are reclaiming what they see as their ancestral lands, and their architecture reflects that. Temporary but defiant, ready to move but refusing to hide. These tents announce presence, stake territory, declare that the Reach belongs to them regardless of what Markarth's Jarl claims. The decorations tell stories too. Skulls marking boundaries, warning intruders, furs and hides showing their connection to the wild, Hagraven totems indicating allegiance to their matriarchs. Every camp is a statement, a piece of political architecture that says, we were here first, we remember what was taken and we're taking it back. Then there are the bandit camps, scattered across Skyrim's wilderness, showing signs of interrupted lives in poignant detail. A meal left half-eaten on a table. Bedrolls arranged around fire pits that have gone cold. Personal effects scattered about, suggesting these weren't always desperate criminals, but people who found themselves outside the law, making what homes they could in ruins and caves. Some bandit camps occupy Nordic ruins, sleeping in the same chambers where ancient Nords once lived, using furniture that's centuries old. Others claim caves, hanging makeshift partitions to create privacy, stacking crates to form walls. There's something almost tragic about the domesticity of it, the attempts to create comfort in these harsh places, to build community even in outlawry. The camps often show defensive thinking too, position to control approaches, with sight lines to key routes, elevated positions where possible. These people live with constant threat, and their architecture reflects that paranoia. Even their sleeping arrangements suggest readiness to fight or flee. Nothing is permanent because permanence is a luxury bandits can't afford. Underground, in the ancient tombs, something else entirely awaits. The Draug are placed mid-failed escapes in ways that tell disturbing stories. You'll find them collapse against sealed doors, hands still raised as if pounding for release, slumped at the bases of staircases they were climbing when whatever holds them took effect, sprawled in corridors leading toward exits they never reached. These placements suggest the Draug didn't choose their eternal service. They were trapped in it, caught trying to flee. Some tombs show Draug arranged in alcoves, orderly, intentional, as if they went willingly to their rest. But others show struggle, show panic frozen in ancient flesh. The architecture becomes narrative here. The positioning of bodies telling tales of ancient horrors, of rituals that went wrong or went exactly as planned, depending on perspective. The deeper you go in Nordic tombs, the older everything becomes, the more the architecture shifts from those upper chambers that might be merely centuries old to lower levels that date back millennia. And in those deepest places, the Draug are seen more purposefully arranged, more ceremonially positioned. These aren't the failed escapes of servants. These are the honored dead, the dragon priests and their most faithful, arrayed with intention. Castle crypts show fresh blood trails in ways that raise uncomfortable questions. These aren't ancient bloodstains, faded with time. These are recent, sometimes still wet, leading from cells to altars, from torture chambers to dining halls. Vampire covens occupy these spaces now, and their architectural additions are minimal but telling. Chains mounted to walls, drainage channels cut into floors, secret passages to allow movement during daylight hours. The vampires don't renovate, they utilize. They find castles already equipped with dungeons, already designed with defensibility in mind, already isolated from civilization. They move in and make minor adjustments, blocking windows, reinforcing doors, adding the infrastructure of feeding and imprisonment. The architecture was already halfway to serving their purposes. They just completed the transformation. Those blood trails map out the geography of vampiric existence. From capture point to holding cell, from cell to feeding chamber, from chamber to disposal site, the castle architecture becomes a circuit of predation, each room serving a function in the cycle of hunting and consumption. Even in undeath, even in corruption, there's a kind of terrible efficiency. Nature reclaims in other ways too. Vines creeping through stonework, trees growing through collapsed roofs, water finding its way into chambers meant to stay dry. Time is patient, and entropy works slowly but inevitably. The ruins aren't just occupied by new inhabitants. They're being unmade by weather and roots, and the simple persistence of the natural world asserting itself against structures that try to deny it. What the Dwemer built, what the Nords raised, what humans and elves constructed to last forever, none of it does. Nature and corruption reclaim it all, transforming monuments to civilization into homes for things that never wanted civilization in the first place. The architecture remains, but its purposes shift, its meanings change. The ruins remember being something else, but they adapt to what they become. This world wasn't handcrafted. It was engineered. There's a truth beneath Skyrim's surface that's worth understanding, a methodology that made this vast province possible. Bethesda used modular kits for efficient design, and this changed everything. Rather than building each structure piece by piece, unique and individual, they created sets of components that could be combined in countless ways. Wall sections, floor pieces, ceiling tiles, doorways, columns. Each element designed to connect seamlessly with others. It's like a massive architectural Lego set, where the same blocks create infinite variations. This approach might sound limiting, but it's actually liberating with the right kit. Designers who construct entire dungeons, entire cities, entire ruins without starting from scratch each time. The consistency this creates is what makes Skyrim feel coherent. Feel like a real place with regional building traditions rather than a collection of random structures. Uniform door frame dimensions enable seamless transitions throughout the game world. Every Nordic door frame matches every other. Every Dwemer passage connects properly to every other. This seemingly small detail is actually crucial. It means you can move from exterior to interior, from one cell to another, without jarring breaks in scale or proportion. The world flows because its fundamental measurements align. Think about what this means practically. A designer building a longhouse knows exactly how big to make the doorway because there's a standard. A player walking through Skyrim never notices that doors are uniform sizes, which is exactly the point. The engineering disappears into the experience, becomes invisible through its precision. Land deeds limit plots to 3 holds, and this constraint is actually meaningful. You can't own property everywhere. You have to choose. Falkreath, with its dense forests and proximity to the lake. The Pale, isolated and harsh, but strategically positioned. Jalmarch, with its marshes and mists. Each location offers different resources, different views, different experiences of home. The limitation forces decision, makes each plot more valuable, because you can't have them all. This scarcity creates attachment. The house you build isn't just a house. It's your house, in your chosen location, reflecting your priorities. Some players want the warm forests. Others want the northern isolation. The architecture becomes personal through placement, through the choice of where to put down roots. The drafting tables enforce build order with a logic that mimics real construction. You can't build the roof before the walls. Can't add the second floor before completing the first. The table presents options in sequence, guiding you through the process step by step. Foundation first, always, then walls, then the main hall takes shape. Only after establishing the core structure can you add wings, additions, the customizations that make the house uniquely yours. This enforced progression prevents chaos, ensures structural logic even in a game world. It teaches building grammar, makes you think about architecture as a process rather than a product. Each decision at the drafting table has prerequisites, has consequences for what comes next. The table is teacher, planner, enforcer of order. Resources matter, here in ways they don't elsewhere in Skyrim. Quarried stone and clay regenerate endlessly at designated sites near your property. You can return to the same stone quarry repeatedly, mining it again and again, the earth generously providing. The clay deposit never depletes. These basic materials, the foundation construction, remain abundant. You'll never be blocked from building by lack of stone or clay. But other materials require more effort, more engagement with Skyrim's economy and systems. Iron ingots must be smelted locally at your property's forge. You can't just buy them pre-made. You have to bring iron ore, fuel the smelter, do the work yourself. This grounds construction in labor, in your direct participation. Your house is built with ingots you personally smelted, adding a layer of investment beyond gold spent. Sawn logs must be purchased from sawmills scattered across Skyrim, creating a relationship between your construction project and the province's lumber industry. You travel to Half Moon Mill, to Dragon Bridge, to Onda's Mill, and you buy their product. The economy becomes real. Your house building supports these businesses, moves gold through the system, makes you a participant in Skyrim's commercial life, rather than an observer. There's something grounding about riding to a sawmill with gold in your pocket, specifically to buy lumber for your house. The material has a source, a vendor, a price. Your manor doesn't materialize from abstraction. It comes from specific logs cut at specific mills by specific NPCs. The architecture has provenance. As construction progresses and your wealth grows, stewards automate late-game material purchases, acknowledging that the initial investment was about engagement, but endless material gathering becomes tedious. Hand your steward gold, and they'll handle acquiring what you need. It's a smart balance. Early building requires your involvement, but later stages can be delegated. You've proven you understand the process. Now you can focus on other aspects while construction continues. The steward system recognizes that players have other adventures to pursue, other quests demanding attention. Your house shouldn't hold you hostage to material gathering. Pay the steward. Head out to fight dragons or delve ruins. Return to find progress made. The house becomes part of your larger Skyrim life, rather than consuming it entirely. Unique manor features reflect your environment in ways that make each plot distinct. Build in Falkreath and you can add an apiary, keeping bees among the forests, harvesting honey and beer-related ingredients. The location supports this feature naturally. Dense flowers, temperate climate, an environment where bees would thrive. Build near water and you can construct a fish hatchery, stocking it with various species, creating a renewable source of fish and roe. The architecture adapts to geography, takes advantage of what the location offers. A hatchery wouldn't make sense in the Pale's frozen reaches, but near marshes or lakes, it's perfectly logical. These features aren't just functional, they're aesthetic, they're thematic. They make your house feel integrated with its surroundings rather than imposed upon them. The architecture acknowledges where it exists, responds to local conditions, becomes part of the landscape rather than simply occupying it. You can customize interiors too, choosing between different room types for your wings. Armory or alchemy laboratory, bedroom or storage, kitchen or enchanting tower. Each choice shapes how you'll use the space. What role this house plays in your adventuring life. Is it primarily a crafting hub, a display gallery for trophies, a comfortable home for your family? The architecture bends to your priorities. Eventually, Skyrim becomes yours not through conquest or politics, but through this simple act of building. You take raw materials from the earth and transform them into shelter. You choose a location and claim it. You watch walls rise and rooms take shape. You fill the house with your possessions, your family, your life. The architecture stops being something you navigate through and becomes something you created, something that reflects you. And there's a peculiar satisfaction in fast traveling to my house rather than to city or inn. The map marker becomes personal. That structure on that hill, that's yours. You chose the land, designed the layout, gathered materials, watched it grow. In a province full of ancient architecture built by vanished peoples or established civilizations, you've added something new, something that didn't exist until you made it exist. Skyrim becomes yours one stone at a time, one log at a time, one decision at the drafting table at a time. The architecture transforms from backdrop to creation, from environment to home, and that house on that hill becomes the center of your Skyrim, the place you return to, the place that knows you're coming home. Skyrim is still being rebuilt. More than a decade after release, the architecture continues to evolve, not through official updates, but through the passionate work of modders who see possibilities in every stone. Certain mods expose Hellfire house kits, making those construction pieces available for broader use. What Bethesda created for player homes becomes a toolkit for community builders. Suddenly, those modular components can be used anywhere, repurposed for new structures, new settlements, new architectural visions. The kit that built your manor can now build entire villages, custom dungeons, unique locations that never existed in the base game. This exposure of the underlying systems democratizes creation. Modders don't need to create assets from scratch. They can use Bethesda's own pieces, rearranged, recombined, deployed in ways the original designers never intended. The architecture becomes a language anyone can speak, given the right tools and sufficient patience. Tamriel Reloaded and similar projects rework base architecture with higher resolution textures, improved models, enhanced details that the original game's technical limitations couldn't support. Stone walls gain depth and weathering they lacked before. Wood grain becomes visible, individual planks distinguishable. Metal fittings show patina and age. The fundamental structures remain the same, but they're rendered with a fidelity that makes them feel more real, more tangible, more present. These visual overhauls don't change layouts or proportions. They enhance what's already there, revealing details that were always conceptually present but technically absent. A Nordic longhouse is still a Nordic longhouse, but now you can see the individual chisel marks in the stone foundation, the way timber has weathered differently on sun-facing versus shadowed sides. The architecture gains texture, literally and figuratively. The community seeks deeper, hold-specific redesigns, going beyond surface improvements to reimagine entire cities and regions. Projects that expand Windhelm, making it feel truly ancient and sprawling. Mods that rebuild Winterhold to its pre-collapse glory, showing what the city was before the Great Collapse swallowed most of it into the sea. Overhauls that give each old capital a more distinct architectural personality, pushing the differences between regions further than the base game could. These redesigns often start from lore, from descriptions in books and dialogue that suggest Skyrim cities should be larger, more complex, more populated than game limitations allowed. The mods attempt to fulfill that potential, to build a Skyrim that existed in imagination before technical constraints shaped it into what shipped. Their acts of architectural archaeology, excavating the ideal from beneath the practical. Some modders focus on interiors, expanding homes and shops to feel more lived in, more functional. A blacksmith's house gains a proper forge area, storage for materials, living quarters that make sense for the work being done. Inns expand to accommodate the number of NPCs supposedly living there. The architecture starts serving believability over gameplay convenience, prioritizing immersion over performance. Others work on exteriors, adding buildings to cities that feel underpopulated, filling in the spaces between major structures with homes and shops and businesses that make urban areas feel urban. These additions respect the modular kit systems, maintaining visual consistency while expanding scope. The new buildings don't stand out as foreign. They blend, they belong, they feel like they were always meant to be there. Early concept art locked Skyrim's ancient aesthetic before a single asset was modeled. Artists drew Viking-inspired halls, weathered stone fortifications, timber structures designed to shed snow. Those drawings established a visual vocabulary, set the tone, determined what Skyrim would look and feel like. Every subsequent decision, every kit built, every texture painted, referred back to those foundational images. That concept art showed a world already old, already weathered, where new construction was rare, and most structures dated back generations or centuries. It rejected clean fantasy aesthetics in favor of something grimier, more lived in, more real. The architecture wouldn't gleam. It would endure, bearing the marks of time and use and harsh climate. This decision, made early, shaped everything that followed. The concept artists understood something crucial. Skyrim needed to feel like it had existed long before players arrived and would continue existing after they left. The architecture couldn't seem created for the player's benefit. It had to seem created for its own purposes, with the players simply passing through spaces built for other reasons. This philosophy infused every design choice. Bethesda empowered designers to create over 200 locations using those established kits and aesthetic guidelines. 200 dungeons, ruins, caves, camps, each one built by individual designers making specific choices within shared systems. The company structure supported this distributed creativity, trusting designers to understand the language and speak it fluently, to create variety within consistency. This empowerment meant freedom within constraints. Designers couldn't diverge too far from the established aesthetic, couldn't break the modular systems, had to maintain performance standards. But within those boundaries, they had enormous creative latitude. How to arrange the pieces, what story to tell through placement, what gameplay to support through layout. These decisions belong to them. The result is architectural diversity that still feels coherent. 200 locations that are each distinct yet recognizably Skyrim. The design philosophy encouraged personality while maintaining unity, allowing individual vision while serving collective identity. Every designer added their voice to the chorus without drowning out the others. And now the modding community continues that tradition, empowering themselves to expand, enhance, rebuild. They work with the same kits, follow the same aesthetic, but push boundaries, explore possibilities, ask, what if? What if Whiterun had a proper port district? What if Dwemer ruins showed more variety in their decay? What if Nordic architecture had regional variations reflecting centuries of isolated development? Skyrim is still being rebuilt because its architecture was designed to be modifiable, because its systems were transparent enough to understand and robust enough to extend. The modular kits that enable Bethesda's designers to create efficiently also enable modders to create expansively. The tools that built the original world continue building new versions of it. Texture artists replace every surface with higher fidelity versions. Modelers add geometric complexity to structures that were simple by necessity. Level designers create entirely new locations using the established vocabulary. The community have become custodian of Skyrim's architecture, maintaining it, improving it, expanding it, ensuring it never becomes static, never becomes finished. More than a decade later, Skyrim is still being rebuilt, stone by stone, texture by texture, location by location. The architecture evolves through community effort, through thousands of modders each contributing their vision of what Skyrim could be, should be, might become. The province grows beyond its original boundaries, not geographically, but in detail, in depth, in realization of potential. And perhaps this is fitting. A land defined by ancient structures, by ruins that outlasted their creators, now sustained by a community that refuses to let it age, that continuously restores and expands and reimagines. Skyrim's architecture was built to endure. The modding community ensures it does, that it continues growing, continues evolving, continues being rebuilt by people who love enough to invest countless hours in making it more than it was. The architecture of Skyrim isn't finished. It may never be finished, and that's exactly how it should be. Skyrim's architecture isn't heroic. It's practical. Behind every structure, there's a solution to a problem, an answer to a challenge posed by climate, terrain, or the simple demands of survival. Take the sawmills like Riverwoods. These structures use dual construction methods. Timber posts infill with stone, reflecting a transitional approach between crude frontier work and skilled carpentry. The heavy timber posts provide the structural framework, the bones that bear the weight and resist the forces of machinery. But between those posts, stone fills the gaps, creating walls that don't require precision joinery of pure timber construction. This hybrid method speaks to practical constraints. Skilled carpenters are rare on the frontier, stone masons even more so, but nearly anyone can stack stone between existing posts, creating walls that are sturdy, if not elegant. The sawmill needs to be functional, needs to house machinery and protect it from weather. The dual structure achieves this without requiring master craftsmen, without consuming precious skilled labor better used elsewhere. The technique also allows for expansion and repair. Damaged stone infill can be replaced without compromising the structural posts. Additional bays can be added by extending the post framework and filling in new sections. The architecture grows with need, adapts to changing requirements, serves a working building that must evolve as the business does. Look at the covered bridges spanning rivers like the White River. These rely on interlocking timber arches that allow floodwaters and ice to pass beneath without collapsing the span. The arches aren't decorative, they're load distributing, transferring the bridge's weight to banks while creating a curved underside that deflects flowing water and ice. In spring, when snowmelt swells the rivers, when broken ice chunks tumble downstream, these bridges survive where flat spans have failed. The curved profile guides debris underneath and past, rather than catching it, building pressure, eventually succumbing. The interlocking design means no single timber bears all the stress. Failure of one piece doesn't doom the whole structure. The covered portion protects the wooden deck from constant weathering, extending the bridge's lifespan considerably. Rain and snow fall on the roof, not the walking surface. The timber underneath stays relatively dry, resists rot longer, requires less frequent replacement. The roof is practical, not picturesque, though it happens to be both. Rural homes throughout Skyrim use L-shaped layouts resting on raised plinth foundations, lifting wooden frames above flood-prone meadows and snowmelt zones. The L shape is an aesthetic choice. It's defensive architecture, creating a protected corner where the entrance can be positioned away from prevailing winds, where a small courtyard forms naturally, where animals can be sheltered in the angle. Those raised foundations keep living spaces above the wet. Spring melt turns fields to mud, standing water that would rot floor timbers if they sat directly on grade. The plinth raises everything just enough, allowing air circulation underneath, preventing moisture from wicking up into the structure. It's a simple solution to a constant problem. Execute in stone, because stone doesn't care about being wet. The foundations also provide thermal mass, absorbing sun warmth during the day and radiating it at night. Not much, but enough to make a difference in a climate where every bit of warmth matters. The architecture serves multiple purposes through single elements, efficiency born of necessity. Ore mines reinforce their portals with squared timber braces angled to deflect falling rock, while framing pulley systems for hauling ore. The angles aren't arbitrary. They're calculated, based on generations of mining experience, understanding how rock breaks and falls, how to redirect force away from the entrance, how to create a safe zone for workers moving in and out. The bracing also supports the pulley mechanisms, creating strong attachment points for ropes and wheels without separate structures. The same timbers that make the mine entrance safe also enable the mine's operation. Again, that efficiency, that dual purpose, that refusal to build anything that serves only one function when it could serve two. The timber itself is massive, oversized for what would seem necessary, but miners know that rockfalls are unpredictable, that having excessive strength is the only way to guarantee sufficient strength. The bracing represents insurance, engineering conservatism born from understanding consequences of failure. Lake docks extend in T-shapes, stabilizing long piers against ice flows using submerged stone anchors rather than visible supports. The T configuration creates lateral bracing, preventing the pier from twisting or shifting when ice pushes against it. A straight pier is vulnerable, but T-shape resists lateral forces through geometric advantage. Those submerged stone anchors solve multiple problems. Visible supports would catch ice, create pressure points where damage occurs. Sunken stones anchor through weight and friction, without presenting obstacles to surface ice. They're invisible, unobtrusive, but absolutely essential. The dock appears to simply rest on a lake bed, but beneath the surface, tons of carefully placed stone hold everything in position. The T-shape also creates a working area at the pier's end, space for boats to dock on either side, for fishermen to work around the perimeter, for cargo to be staged. Form follows function, and the function demanded this shape. Many settlements tunnel basement entrances below snow lines, using sloped ice ramps to prevent doors from freezing shut during heavy winters. A door at grade level will freeze closed, trapped by ice buildup, rendered useless exactly when you most need access. But a door below grade, accessed by a descending ramp, stays protected from the worst accumulation. The ramp itself is sloped specifically to shed water, to prevent pooling that would freeze into obstacles. The angle is steep enough to drain, but gentle enough to remain navigable even when icy. It's a careful balance, refined over generations of winter experience, understanding exactly how water behaves in freezing conditions. These sunken entrances also create thermal barriers. The below-grade space acts as an airlock, a buffer zone between exterior cold and interior warmth. You descend the ramp, enter through the lower door, and you've created two barriers instead of one, significantly reducing heat loss. And here's a detail you might never notice unless you look closely. Ice bucket spikes embedded into pier edges, allowing residents to break frozen water surfaces without damaging dock structures. Small metal spikes, positioned at intervals, providing purchase points for tools, for feet, for breaking ice safely. Without these spikes, people would damage the wood, would chip and crack the pier edges trying to break ice to access water. The spikes absorb that abuse, can be replaced when worn, protect the more expensive and difficult to repair structural elements. They're tiny, almost invisible, but they represent thoughtful design, someone anticipating a need and engineering a solution. Skyrim's architecture isn't about monuments to ambition, it's about solutions to problems. How do you cross a river that carries ice flows? You build a specific kind of bridge. How do you keep a house dry in a floodplain? You raise it. How do you make a dock that survives winter? You anchor it invisibly and add tiny spikes for ice breaking. Every structure, every detail, every architectural choice serves survival, serves function, serves the practical demands of living in a harsh land. The heroism, if there is any, lies in the accumulated wisdom of generations, in the knowledge built into every timber brace and stone foundation, in the understanding that in Skyrim, your architecture either works or you don't survive. There's no room for purely aesthetic choices, no tolerance for buildings that prioritize appearance over function. The beauty emerges from practicality, from solutions that work so well they become elegant through their efficiency. The architecture of Skyrim is the architecture of survival, refined over centuries into forms that serve their purposes perfectly, without waste, without decoration, without anything that doesn't earn its place through utility. In Skyrim, buildings expect to be attacked. The architecture doesn't hope for peace. It prepares for violence, anticipates assault, builds defense into every line and angle. Frontier forts hug terrain contours instead of perfect grids, aligning battlements with natural choke points rather than aesthetic symmetry. A fortress on level ground is easy to attack from any direction, but a fortress that follows a land, that positions walls along ridgelines, that places towers where valleys narrow, that uses cliffs and rivers as part of its defensive perimeter, that fortress multiplies its defenders' effectiveness. These forts reject the clean geometry of imperial military architecture. Roman-style fortifications impose order on landscape, creating perfect squares and rectangles regardless of terrain. Nordic forts do the opposite. They read the land, understand its defensive advantages, and build to exploit them. A wall runs along a cliff edge not because it looks good there, but because attackers can't approach from that side. A gate opens into a narrow defile not for aesthetic reasons, but because 10 defenders can hold that passage against 50 attackers. The battlements shift elevation constantly, following the terrain's natural rises and falls. This creates overlapping fields of fire, ensures that archers can cover approaches from multiple angles, eliminates dead zones where attackers could advance unseen. Every battlement position can support adjacent positions. The architecture creates mutual coverage through its adaptation to landscape. Rural palisades use sharpened pine stakes driven into raised earth berms, angled outward to snap ladders and deter cavalry charges. The stakes aren't vertical. They lean, creating an overhang that makes scaling nearly impossible. Put a ladder against them, and the ladder's weight pushes it away from the wall. The geometry works against attackers, turns their own tools into liabilities. The earth berms serve multiple purposes. They elevate the palisade, adding effective height. Without additional stake length, they provide a fighting platform for defenders, allowing them to see over the wall while protected by it. And crucially, they stabilize the stakes, embed them in compacted earth that resists the impact of battering rams and the pressure of mass bodies pushing against the barrier. Pine is chosen deliberately. It's abundant, fast-growing, replaceable, but it's also resinous, resistant to rot, and when properly sharpened, hard enough to turn aside most weapons and tools. The stakes can be replaced individually as they weather or break, without compromising the overall palisade. The architecture is maintainable, designed for the reality that defenses will be tested, will be damaged, will need repair. The outward angle also makes cavalry charges suicidal. Horses won't willingly run into angled stakes. Even if forced, the geometry ensures stakes penetrate upward into vulnerable undersides, creating maximum damage for minimum material. It's brutal efficiency, defense designed by people who survived attacks and learned from them. Watchtowers feature rotating slat shutters that allow archers to fire while blocking incoming arrows between volleys. The shutters pivot on central pins, can be opened for a shot and immediately closed for protection. An archer can loose an arrow through the gap, rotate the shutter close, reload under cover, then rotate it open again for the next shot. This system dramatically increases archer survivability. A fixed opening is a target, and enemy archers will concentrate fire on it. But a rotating shutter appears closed most of the time, offers no clear target, and opens only for the brief moment necessary to release an arrow. The defender controls timing, chooses when to expose themselves, minimizes vulnerability. The slats are angled even when closed, deflecting arrows rather than catching them flat. A direct hit glances away instead of penetrating. The wood is thick enough to stop most arrows, but light enough to rotate easily. The mechanism is simple, unlikely to jam, maintainable by anyone with basic carpentry skills. It's soldier-proof design, architecture that works even when damaged, tired, or operated by frightened conscripts rather than professional soldiers. The watchtower brickwork uses diminishing stone sizes toward the top, exaggerating height and intimidation without additional material cost. Larger stones form the base, both for structural reasons and visual impact. But as the tower rises, stones gradually decrease in size, creating a forced perspective that makes the structure appear taller than it actually is. This isn't accidental. It's psychological warfare through architecture. An approaching enemy sees a tower that seems impossibly tall, suggesting unlimited resources, superior engineering, daunting defensive capability. The reality might be more modest, but perception matters in warfare. If enemies believe they face overwhelming defenses, they might not attack at all. The technique also has practical advantages. Smaller stones at height mean less weight at the top, reducing structural demands on the foundation. They're easier to lift into position during construction, and if the tower's upper section suffer damage, they're easier to repair with locally sourced stone. The architecture is clever in multiple dimensions simultaneously. In the Reach, cliffside homes embed iron grappling hooks directly into stone faces, securing rope ladders that can be cut during Forsworn raids. These homes exist in a state of permanent semi-siege, accessible only by a ladder from below. The hooks are the only anchors, the only connection between home and earth. During raids, residents simply cut the ladders. The ropes fall away, leaving the home isolated, unreachable except by climbing gear the Forsworn rarely carry. The defenders wait in their cliff dwellings, watching enemies rage below, unable to reach them. When danger passes, new ropes are secured, ladders rehung, access restored. The iron hooks themselves are forged to withstand tremendous weight and stress, driven deep into carefully selected rock that won't crack or crumble. Each hook represents significant investment, skilled metalwork, and careful installation, but they're literally life-saving, the difference between security and vulnerability. The homes themselves cling to cliff faces in ways that seem precarious, but are actually quite stable, built into natural alcoves, secured with additional anchor points, designed to shed rain and snow without accumulating weight that might destabilize them. It's architecture born of desperation, refined into effectiveness, sustained by necessity. Khajiit caravans form defensive wagon circles when stopped, with tapered canvas roofs channeling rain toward a central fire pit while shielding goods. The wagons arrange themselves with careful precision, creating an enclosed space, a temporary fortress. Gaps between wagons are minimal, controllable, defendable. The tapered roofs serve multiple purposes. They shed weather, protecting goods and people. They direct rainwater inward, toward the fire pit that serves as the circle center. This collected water can be used for cooking, washing, drinking. The architecture turns rain from nuisance to resource. But those roofs also provide cover, creating a sheltered zone where Khajiit can work, eat, sleep without exposure. And in combat, they block arrows from above, force attackers to engage at ground level where the Khajiit's defensive circle is strongest. The architecture shapes combat, channels it, gives advantage to defenders who might otherwise be vulnerable. The wagons themselves are built sturdy, their walls thick enough to stop arrows, their wheels lockable to prevent the circle from being broken apart. Each wagon connects to its neighbors, creating not just a circle of vehicles, but unified defensive structure. Attack one wagon, and you're immediately engaged by defenders from adjacent positions. In Skyrim, buildings expect to be attacked because Skyrim is a land where peace is always temporary, where the next threat is always coming, where survival belongs to those who prepare. The architecture doesn't hope. It plans. It anticipates. It builds in defenses that seem paranoid until the moment they're desperately necessary. Every fort, every palisade, every tower, every home. They're all built by people who remember attacks, who survived them, who've learned what works and what fails. The architecture is a repository of hard-won knowledge, of lessons written in blood and refined through generations. It's not paranoid to build defensively when the threats are real, constant, inevitable. The buildings of Skyrim stand ready, always ready, because they have no choice. In this land, architecture that doesn't defend doesn't survive, and neither do the people sheltering within it. Skyrim's buildings don't just shelter, they believe. The architecture carries faith, embodies worship, manifests conviction in stone and timber and sacred geometry. Talos shrines follow golden ratio proportions, echoing the geometry of dragon claw doors and reinforcing divine legitimacy through scale. This isn't coincidence. The builders understood mathematical harmony, recognized that certain proportions resonate as correct, as divine, as worthy of reverence. The golden ratio appears in nature, in growth patterns, in the spiral of shells and the branching of trees. To build a shrine using these proportions is to align it with fundamental patterns of creation. The connection to dragon claw doors is deliberate, linking Talos worship to ancient Nordic tradition, to the age of dragon priests and the first empire of men. The proportions say, this god belongs here. His worship continues something ancient and true. His divinity echoes through architectural lineage back to the beginning of Nordic civilization. The geometry itself becomes theological argument. The scale reinforces this. Talos shrines are sized to inspire awe but not terror, reverence but not subjugation. Their human-scale divinity, a god who was once man, who understands mortality, who ascended but didn't abandon. The proportions make this clear through pure mathematics, through relationships of height to width that feel right in ways worshippers might not consciously understand but definitely feel. Temple oculi align precisely to the winter solstice dawn, illuminating rune circles for seasonal divination rituals. These alignments require sophisticated astronomical knowledge, require understanding the sun's path of the year, require construction precision that ensures the alignment remains accurate across centuries. The architecture becomes an instrument, a tool for capturing specific moments of celestial significance. On the winter solstice, when the sun reaches its southern extreme, when darkness triumphs most completely before turning back toward light, the temple oculus channels the first rays of dawn directly onto prepared rune circles. The light itself becomes sacred, becomes medium for divination, becomes a god's instrument for revealing truth to prepared priests. The rune circles are positioned where the light will strike, not approximately, exactly. The architecture and the ritual site are designed together, each demanding specific properties from the other. The building serves the ceremony, enables it, makes it possible. Without the correctly aligned oculus, without the precisely calculated light path, the ritual loses its potency, its connection to celestial forces. This means these temples must be maintained with absolute precision, a settling foundation that shifts the oculus even slightly, a damaged roof that alters the light path. These aren't merely structural problems, they're theological crises. The architecture's sacred function depends on geometric perfection, maintained across generations. Winterhold homes carve wraith motifs into door lintels, believed to ward off glacial spirits and sea ghosts. In this cold, haunted region where the Great Collapse swallowed most of the city into the sea, where ghosts are more than metaphor, these carvings represent desperate faith. They're not decoration. They're protection, magical architecture, built belief in the power of symbols to shield against supernatural threats. The motifs depict wraiths not naturalistically but abstractly, capturing their essential threatening nature while avoiding creating images that might themselves become vessels for spiritual occupation. It's careful magic, understanding that depiction carries power, that the wrong image might attract rather than repel. The carvings walk a line between representation and abstraction, potent enough to ward but safe enough not to invite. Every home bears them because every home needs them. In Winterhold, supernatural danger isn't superstition. It's documented, experienced, survived. The architecture adapts accordingly, building protective magic directly into structural elements. The lintel, which bears physical weight, also bears spiritual responsibility. It must be strong enough to hold up the wall and strong enough to keep out things that don't respect walls. Private quarters throughout Skyrim carve antler motifs into lintels, invoking mead hall traditions and ancestral lineage in intimate spaces. The antler is a symbol of prosperity, of successful hunts, of the bond between Nordic culture and the wild animals that sustain it. To carve antlers above your private door is to claim connection to that tradition, to assert your place in an unbroken line, reaching back to the first Atmarans who hunted these lands. In mead halls, actual antlers hang as trophies, as proof of prowess, as contributions to communal wealth. In private homes, carved representations serve similar purposes but more intimately. This is your family's claim to Nordic identity, your household's connection to ancestral ways. The carving says, "We remember, we continue, we belong to this tradition." The antler motif also carries connotations of renewal, since stags shed and regrow their antlers annually. There's an implication of cyclical strength, of the ability to recover from loss, to rebuild after hardship. For a people who've endured much, who survived conquest and catastrophes, this symbolism resonates deeply. The architecture whispers, "We endure, we regenerate, we persist." Ancient Nord tombs feature abstract dragon motifs rather than literal depictions, reflecting symbolic worship rather than idolization. The ancient Nords didn't carve realistic dragons on their tomb walls. Instead, they created stylized representations, geometric patterns that suggested dragon nests, without depicting actual dragons. This distinction matters theologically. Literal depiction implies the thing itself has power, deserves direct reverence. Abstract representation suggests a concept, the principle, the divine quality the thing embodies. The ancient Nords worshipped dragon priests, served them, feared them, but they understood power came from something beyond the physical form, something the dragon symbolized rather than was. The abstract motifs allow for mystery, for interpretation, for evolution of understanding. A literal carving is fixed, defines its subject completely. An abstract pattern invites contemplation, suggests depths not fully revealed. The tomb architecture creates space for theological complexity, for relationship with divine power that's nuanced rather than simple. These patterns repeat throughout the tombs, creating rhythm, establishing sacred geometry. The repetition reinforces meaning through accumulation, through pattern recognition that operates below conscious thought. Walk through these spaces and the dragon motifs around you. Immerse you. Create an environment of sacred symbolism that shapes consciousness without demanding specific intellectual engagement. The architecture of belief in Skyrim is architecture that does work beyond physical function. It channels light for rituals, wards against spirits, proclaims lineage, embodies theological positions. The buildings don't just house believers. They participate in belief, make it manifest, give it form and presence in the physical world. Stone carved with protective symbols isn't just stone anymore. It's guardian, defender, magical barrier. A temple aligned to solstice isn't just a building. It's astronomical instrument, ritual enabler, connection point between earth and sky. A lintel bearing antler motifs isn't just structural support. It's declaration of identity. Claim to tradition, assertion of belonging. The buildings believe because the people building them believed, and they pour that belief into proportion and alignment and carved symbol. The architecture became vessel for faith, container for conviction, physical manifestation of spiritual commitment. And even now, even for those who don't consciously understand the sacred geometry or the protective carvings, the buildings continue believing, continue performing their spiritual functions, continue embodying the faith that shaped them. In Skyrim, where gods are real, where magic functions, where spirits genuinely threaten, architecture that believes isn't metaphor, it's necessity. The buildings must believe because belief has power, and power requires form, and form is architecture's domain. The stones themselves remember why they were shaped this way, remember the prayers spoken during their placement, remember the faith that demanded specific proportions and alignments and symbols. They remember and they believe, and they shelter those who shelter within them with more than just walls and roofs. They shelter with sacred geometry, with protective carvings, with astronomical alignments that connect mortal spaces to divine patterns. The architecture believes, and belief built into stone endures long after individual believers have turned to dust. Comfort is engineered, not assumed. In Skyrim, where the climate is hostile and resources are precious, every element of comfort is deliberate, calculated, designed into the architecture with careful intention. Blacksmith forges vent smoke through offset chimneys to prevent backdrafts during bellows surges. When a blacksmith pumps the bellows, air pressure inside the forge increases dramatically. Suddenly, a straight chimney above the forge will create a column where this pressurized air can push smoke downward as easily as upward, especially if wind conditions outside create negative pressure. The result is a workshop filled with choking smoke, a blacksmith unable to see or breathe, dangerous conditions around hot metal and open flame. The offset chimney solves this elegantly. The smoke path turns, creating a baffle that allows steady flow upward but resists sudden reversals. When the bellows surge, the pressure wave dissipates through the turn rather than forcing smoke back down. The geometry itself regulates flow, creates one-way passage through pure physics rather than mechanical intervention. This design comes from experience, from generations of blacksmiths who suffered through smoke-filled workshops before someone understood the problem and engineered the solution. Now it's standard, built into every forge, so common that most people don't notice it. But its absence will be immediately, painfully obvious. The architecture silently maintains comfort that seems natural but is actually highly designed. Those forged chimneys also use angled cowls that redirect sudden gusts, keeping embers from blowing back into workshops. Wind doesn't blow steadily. It gusts, surges, creates sudden pressure changes that can reverse chimney flow momentarily. During those reversals, embers that have traveled up the chimney can be blown back down, creating fire hazards, damaging goods, burning workers. The angle cowl caps the chimney at an angle that deflects wind over and around rather than down into the opening, like a sail set to spill wind rather than catch it. The cowl turns gusts aside, maintains the updraft, protects the forge below. The angle is specific, refined through trial and error, optimized for the kinds of wind pattern Skyrim experiences. These cowls also prevent rain and snow from falling directly down the chimney, which would extinguish the forge, or at minimum create steam that interferes with temperature control. The architecture handles multiple problems simultaneously, each solution integrated into a single designed element that appears simple but embodies sophisticated understanding of fluid dynamics and combustion requirements. Great halls layer tapestries not just for decoration, but to trap heat along exterior walls. Stone walls conduct cold. In winter, an uninsulated stone wall becomes a cold radiator, pulling heat from the room, creating drafts as warm air contacts cold stone and falls. The result is a hall that's comfortable near the fire, but miserably cold anywhere else, wasting fuel and making much of the space unusable. Tapestries create an insulating air gap. Hung an inch or two from the wall, they trap a layer of still air between fabric and stone. That air layer prevents direct contact between room air and cold wall, dramatically reducing heat loss. The tapestries themselves provide additional insulation through their mass and weave. Multiple layers increase effectiveness, creating multiple air gaps, multiple barriers against the cold. This is why great halls drape walls so thoroughly, why the tapestries are often layered 2 or 3 deep. It's not excessive decoration. It's thermal engineering, using available materials. The visual beauty is real, the cultural significance genuine, but the primary function is keeping the hall warm enough to be livable during Skyrim's brutal winters. The tapestries also dampen sound, reduce echoes, make the Great Hall acoustically comfortable for conversation and feasting. They absorb moisture, preventing condensation on cold walls that would create mold and rot. Single elements serving multiple functions, the hallmark of efficient architecture designed for harsh conditions. Horse stables cluster feed troughs centrally, allowing hay to be dropped from lofts through open rafters. This arrangement minimizes labor, reduces waste, improves efficiency in daily operations. Store hay in the loft above, and when feeding time comes, simply open the loft hatch and drop hay directly into the central trough. No carrying armfuls through stable, no scattered feeding, no horses competing for access. The central positioning means horses stand around the perimeter, facing inward toward feed. This arrangement allows stable workers to move around the outside, checking each horse, without walking through the middle where they disturb feeding animals. The architecture choreographs movement creates flow patterns that reduce conflict between humans and horses. The open rafters serve ventilation purposes too. Heat and moisture from the horses rise naturally, escape through the roof structure, preventing the damp, stuffy conditions that lead to respiratory problems in stabled animals. The same openness that allows hay dropping also ensures air circulation, maintaining healthier conditions that reduce veterinary problems and keep horses in working condition. During winter, some stables close portions of the rafters to retain more heat, balancing ventilation against warmth. The architecture allows this flexibility, can be adjusted seasonally without major modification. It's responsive design, acknowledging that needs change with weather and allowing simple adaptation. Hoof-fire greenhouses use iron-framed glass panes deliberately fogged to diffuse frost rather than eliminate it. This seems counterintuitive until you understand the problem they're solving. Clear glass in Skyrim's climate creates thermal shock. Sunlight heats plants intensely during the day. Then at night, clear glass radiates the heat away rapidly, creating temperature swings that stress or kill cold-sensitive plants. Fog glass diffuses both incoming and outgoing thermal radiation. Sunlight enters but spreads evenly rather than creating hot spots. At night, heat escapes more slowly, moderating temperature drops. The result is a more stable thermal environment, gentler conditions that allow a wider range of plants to survive. The fogging also prevents frost from forming as solid ice sheets on the glass, which would block light completely and add destructive weight. Instead, frost forms as a dispersed layer that still transmits diffuse light while insulating. The glass works with Skyrim's climate rather than fighting it, using frost as an asset rather than treating it as a problem to eliminate. The iron framing is crucial too. Wood frames would warp with temperature and moisture changes, breaking the glass panes. Iron remains stable, holds the pane securely regardless of conditions. The metal conducts cold, yes, but the small surface area of the frames means this heat loss is acceptable, far less than the loss that would occur through gaps in a warped wooden frame. These greenhouses represent sophisticated climate engineering, creating microclimates that allow food production in a land where growing seasons are brief and harsh. They're not simple structures. They embody deep understanding of thermodynamics, plant requirements, material properties, and how to balance competing demands within resource constraints. Comfort in Skyrim is never accidental. It's not assumed that buildings will be warm, that air will be breathable, that spaces will be usable. Instead, every element of comfort is designed, engineered, refined through generations of experience. The offset chimneys, the angled cowls, the layered tapestries, the central feed troughs, the fog glass, each represents a problem identified and a solution implemented. The architecture doesn't just provide shelter from weather. It creates livable conditions within that shelter, maintains breathable air, stable temperatures, functional workflows. It does this quietly, through design choices that become invisible once implemented, that seem natural but are actually highly artificial, highly engineered. Walk through any building in Skyrim and you're surrounded by comfort systems that don't announce themselves, that work silently, that fail only through their absence. The architecture has learned what humans need to survive and thrive in this climate, and provides those things through pure design, through geometry and material choices, and careful integration of function into form. Comfort is engineered because in Skyrim, unengineered comfort doesn't exist. Nature provides nothing but challenges. Architecture provides solutions. And every warm hall, every smoke-free forge, every functional stable represents victory. Human ingenuity creating livable space from hostile conditions, engineering comfort one deliberate design choice at a time. Skyrim has a second city you almost never see. Beneath the streets, below the markets and homes, there exists another layer of civilization, darker, damper, more desperate, but no less real. Even palatial cities openly connect sewer systems, allowing skeevers to thrive beneath noble quarters. The wealthy live above, in clean halls with tapestries and hearth fires, but their waste flows down to the same channels that serve the poorest districts. There's a democracy to sewage that architecture can't escape. Everything flows downward, and down there, in the dark passages beneath even the finest homes, skeevers nest and breed. These aren't accidental infestations. The sewer systems, by their very nature, create ideal conditions for vermin. Moisture, darkness, organic waste providing food, connecting passages providing shelter and access throughout the city. The architecture designed to remove human waste inadvertently creates habitat for creatures that thrive in exactly those conditions. The open connections mean problems in one district affect others. Skeevers in the Grey Quarter can travel through sewers to emerge near the Palace of Kings. Plague from the slums can spread through underground channels to anywhere waste flows. The beneath city connects what the surface city tries to segregate. Architecture intended to separate clean from unclean instead creates networks that distribute contamination democratically. City planners know this but accept it as unavoidable. You cannot have dense urban settlement without waste management, and waste management requires connected systems, and connected systems create these underground highways. The alternative is worse: waste accumulating in streets, disease spreading faster, cities becoming uninhabitable. So they build the sewers, accept the skeevers, and occasionally hire people to go below and cull populations when they become too troublesome. The Ratway's descent mirrors real medieval slum planning, where drainage and crime follow the same gravity paths. Both water and desperate people flow downward, accumulating in the lowest places. The Ratway wasn't designed as criminal infrastructure. It was designed as drainage, as access tunnels for maintaining Riffin's canal systems, as service passages for the legitimate city above. Crime simply colonized what utility created. The architecture tells this story through its layers. Upper levels show intentional construction, proper stonework, planned passages serving specific maintenance functions. But as you descend, the infrastructure becomes more improvised, more adapted, more occupied. Criminals have carved out chambers, created living spaces, modified the original design to serve new purposes the builders never intended. The descent itself is both literal and metaphorical. You walk down into physical depth and simultaneously into social depth, into layers of society that exist beneath official recognition. The architecture guides its descent, creates it through connecting passages and stairs, through gradual transitions from legitimate to illicit space. By the time you reach the Ratway's depths, you're in a place the surface city pretends doesn't exist, but which its own infrastructure created and sustains. Water damage marks the walls, showing where drainage systems have leaked or failed. These aren't recent failures. They're chronic, accepted, part of the Ratway's character. No one repairs them because officially, no one should be living here, and unofficially, the people who do live here lack resources for proper maintenance. The architecture decays slowly, returning toward the earth it was carved from. Throughout Skyrim's dungeons, torches are clustered in threes at junctions, creating overlapping shadows that guide AI patrol routes through crypts. This detail is invisible to most players, but it shapes every encounter. Guards and Draug patrol from light cluster to light cluster, following paths defined by illumination. The architecture uses light as invisible infrastructure, directing movement without barriers or signs. The clustering in threes is specific. Single torches create simple circles of light with surrounding darkness. Pairs create overlapping circles, but with a clear direction between them. Threes create a zone of stable illumination with multiple overlapping shadows that indicate surrounding passages. An NPC standing at a three-torch junction can see down multiple corridors, can monitor approaches, can defend effectively. The architecture creates tactical positions through nothing but light placement. The overlapping shadows also create navigation cues for the AI. Shadows indicate walls, openings, directions to travel. The pattern of light and shadow at a three-torch junction is distinctive, recognizable, different from other lighting configurations. The AI doesn't need complex spatial reasoning if it can simply follow light patterns from junction to junction. The architecture simplifies pathfinding by creating clear, consistent navigational markers. For players, these torch clusters serve similar functions, though we rarely consciously notice. We move toward light, use it to orient ourselves, recognize junctions by their illumination. The architecture guides us through the same light patterns that guide the NPCs, creating shared navigation systems that make encounters predictable without being obvious. Draug tombs place bodies mid-action, levers pulled, weapons drawn, freezing failed guardians in eternal duty. These placements tell disturbing stories without words. A Draug collapsed with hands still on a lever suggests they were trying to seal a door, contain something, prevent escape. A Draug with weapon raised mid-swing suggests they were fighting when the magic binding them took hold, or when death finally claimed them. The architecture uses these placements to create narrative, to suggest what happened in these tombs, to hint at the horror of Draug existence. These aren't peaceful dead resting in honored sleep. These are trapped souls, or reanimated corpses, or something worse, caught in eternal service they may not have chosen willingly. Some tombs show Draug arranged in defensive positions, as if they died holding a line against some invasion. Others show them positioned around ritual circles, as if they were performing ceremonies when something went wrong. The architecture and the bodies together tell these stories, create archaeology of ancient disasters that players piece together through observation. The mid-action poses also serve gameplay purposes, creating visual interest, suggesting threat before animation even begins. A Draug pose with weapon raised is visually distinct from one lying in repose, signals danger even when still, primes players for combat. The architecture uses positioning to create atmosphere and telegraph mechanics simultaneously. Blood trails and castle crypts lead upward, implying recent activity rather than ancient decay. This is perhaps the most unsettling architectural detail in Skyrim. Ancient blood would have long since dried, faded, disappeared. Fresh blood, still wet or recently dried, trailing upstairs from dungeons to inhabited areas. This suggests ongoing horror, present threat, activities continuing now rather than ended centuries ago. The trails lead from cells and torture chambers up toward living quarters, toward dining halls, toward places where vampires or necromancers or other predators reside. The architecture maps predation, shows the paths victims take from capture to consumption. These aren't historical artifacts. They're current infrastructure, channels of violence actively maintained and used. Some trails show drag marks, suggesting victims move unconscious or dead. Others show footprints, suggesting victims walked under their own power, escorted or compelled. The architecture preserves these details in blood, creating forensic evidence of atrocities happening just outside player observation. You see the aftermath, the residue, the trails leading to and from violence. The upward direction is crucial. Blood flowing down would suggest drainage, cleaning, removal of evidence. Blood leading up suggests transport victims or vampires carrying prey to feeding chambers or necromancers hauling bodies to reanimation sites. The architecture reveals function through the direction of staining, through accumulated evidence of repeated journeys along the same paths. Skyrim has a second city beneath its visible one, a network of sewers and service tunnels and ancient crypts that connects everything, that allows movement unseen, that houses populations the surface pretends don't exist. Its infrastructure serving purposes beyond original design. Space is colonized and adapted, architecture that creates unintended communities and consequences. This beneath city is darker, damper, more dangerous than the one above. But it's no less real, no less inhabited, no less structured. It has its own rules, its own populations, its own geography mapped in torch clusters and blood trails and sewer connections. It exists because the surface city requires it, because waste must flow somewhere, because maintenance requires access, because crime needs space to operate outside official view. And every major settlement in Skyrim has this dual nature, this visible city above and hidden city below. The architecture creates both simultaneously, cannot have one without the other. The clean requires the unclean, the legitimate requires the illicit, the light requires the dark. Skyrim's second city is shadow cast by the first, inevitable, necessary, ignored but never absent. All of this was intentional. Every detail we've discussed, every architectural choice, every practical solution and symbolic carving, none of it happened by accident. Skyrim's architecture is a result of deliberate design philosophy executed with remarkable consistency. Bethesda locked Skyrim's rugged aesthetic early through concept art, guiding every architectural decision afterward. Before a single 3D model was created, before any dungeon was built, artists drew the vision. They sketched weathered longhouses with steep roofs heavy with snow. They rendered ancient stone fortifications worn by centuries of harsh weather. They illustrated a world that looked lived in, used, aged by time and climate and conflict. Those concept paintings became North Stars for everyone who followed, every modeler creating assets, every designer building locations, every texture artist painting surfaces. They all referred back to that initial vision. The concept art established rules. Buildings should look old, should show weather damage, should reflect practical concerns over aesthetic flourishes. Nordic architecture would be heavy, solid, built to endure. Dwemer ruins would be geometric, alien, still functioning despite abandonment. This early lock-in created consistency across years of development and dozens of contributors. The architecture maintains a coherent identity because everyone was working from the same visual vocabulary, the same understanding of what Skyrim should look and feel like. The concept art didn't just inspire, it constrained in the best possible way, ensuring that every addition to the game world felt like it belonged to the same place. The drawings also established the mood, the atmosphere that architecture would support. This wasn't high fantasy, with gleaming castles and perfect stonework. This was low fantasy, grounded, where buildings showed their age and their scars. The concept art communicated this vision more effectively than any written design document could, creating shared understanding through visual example. Designers built hundreds of locations directly in Editor, allowing architecture to evolve alongside gameplay. This methodology was crucial to Skyrim's success. The designers weren't working in abstract, weren't creating blueprints to be implemented later. They were building spaces they could immediately walk through, test, experience as players would. The architecture and the gameplay emerged together, each influencing the other in real time. A designer would construct a dungeon corridor, walk through it, realize it felt too cramped or too open, and adjust immediately. They'd place enemies, test the encounter, discover the architecture didn't support interesting combat, and modify the space accordingly. The building and the testing happened simultaneously, creating a feedback loop that refined both architecture and gameplay through constant iteration. This approach meant architecture was never purely decorative. It was always functional, always serving gameplay needs, because those needs were tested and validated during construction. A corridor's width was determined not just by aesthetic sense, but by how combat felt in that space. A room's layout was shaped by how enemies patrolled through it, where cover points emerged naturally, how players' sightlines worked. The direct and editor methodology also allowed for happy accidents, for emergent discoveries that became features. A designer might place elements intending one thing, but discover through testing that they created unexpected gameplay opportunities. These discoveries could be enhanced, elaborated, turned into intentional design. The architecture evolved through use, through play, through experiencing it as living space rather than static model. Modular kits enforce realism through constraints, making every space feel plausible rather than theatrical. The kit system could have been limiting, could have made everything feel same-why and repetitive. Instead, it enforced a kind of discipline that served realism, because designers couldn't create any arbitrary space, because they had to work within the kit's vocabulary. The architecture maintained internal consistency and plausibility. Real buildings are constrained by available materials, by construction techniques, by structural requirements. The modular kits impose similar constraints on designers. You couldn't just create any fantastical space you imagined. You had to build using available pieces, following connection rules, respecting the logic of the kit. This mirrored real architectural constraints, created spaces that felt like they could actually be built and inhabited. The constraints also prevented excess, prevented designers from over-designing every space to be unique and special. In reality, most places are ordinary, built from common elements in common ways. The kits enforce this ordinariness, this groundedness. Special locations could still be special through arrangement and context, but the baseline was always plausible, always constrained by the same limits that real architecture faces. This created a world where you believed people actually lived, where buildings served functions beyond providing gameplay spaces. The architecture felt purposeful because it was built with purpose-like constraints, with limitations that forced practical thinking, that prevented pure fantasy from overwhelming believability. Skyrim's architecture succeeds because it behaves like a place, not a level. It responds to weather, to culture, to faith, to fear, to time. Every element we discuss demonstrates this. The steep roofs that shed snow, the defensive positioning that anticipates attack, the sacred geometry that embodies belief, the layered construction showing centuries of modification and repair. The architecture doesn't exist to frame action or provide backdrops for quests. It exists because the people of Skyrim need shelter, need defense, need places to work and worship and live. The buildings answer the questions posed by Skyrim's climate and threats and cultural values. They're solutions to problems, responses to needs, expressions of beliefs and fears and hopes. Weather shapes the architecture constantly. Snow determines roof angles. Wind influences wall thickness. Rain drives drainage decisions. The buildings acknowledge the climate they exist in, adapt to it, survive through design choices that respect natural forces. This responsiveness makes them feel real, makes them seem like they weathered actual winters rather than being placed in a simulation of winter. Culture permeates the architecture. Nordic values of strength and tradition manifest in heavy timber construction and ancient building techniques preserved across generations. Imperial values of order and civilization show in solitude's geometric layouts and proper stonework. Forsworn rejection of conquest expresses through temporary structures and reclaimed ruins. The buildings are cultural artifacts, not neutral containers. Faith inscribes itself in proportions and alignments, in carved symbols and deliberate orientations. The architecture doesn't just house religious practice. It participates in it, enables it, expresses it through form. Buildings become instruments of worship, their very structure serving spiritual purposes alongside practical ones. Fear shapes defensive architecture, creates walls and towers and killing fields. The buildings anticipate violence, prepare for it, incorporate defense into their fundamental design. They remember past attacks and ready themselves for future ones. The architecture is vigilant, always watching, always prepared. Time layers itself through the architecture. Ancient Dwemer foundations support Nordic modifications, which show imperial repairs which bear recent damage. Buildings accumulate history visibly, carry their past into their present. The architecture ages, evolves, adapts, maintains continuity with what came before while serving current needs. All of this was intentional. The concept art that established the vision, the in-editor workflow that refined it, the modular systems that constrained it into plausibility, the philosophy that architecture should behave like real architecture, respond to actual forces and needs rather than existing merely as game environment. Skyrim's architecture is one of gaming's great achievements, precisely because it disappears into believability, because you accept it as simply the way things are in this place rather than marveling at it as design content. It works so well that you stop noticing it's working. Stop recognizing the countless intentional decisions that create the illusion of a place that simply exists rather than was carefully constructed. And perhaps that's the ultimate success of architecture, whether real or virtual. When it stops being something you observe and becomes simply where you are, when it transforms from object of attention into environment of experience, when it serves its purposes so well that those purposes become invisible, natural, assumed. Skyrim's architecture does this. It creates a place that feels real because it behaves according to the logic of real places. It responds to weather and culture and faith and fear and time the way real architecture must. And in doing so, it accomplishes something remarkable. It makes you believe in Skyrim not as game environment, but as actual place, with its own history and logic and reason for being exactly as it is. 100 facts about the architecture of Skyrim, and we've only scratched the surface. Every building, every ruin, every structure tells stories about the people who built it, the forces that shaped it, the purposes it serves. The architecture is text to be read, evidence to be examined, history made physical and permanent. So the next time you walk through Whiterun's gates or descend into a Nordic tomb or shelter from the cold in a longhouse, take a moment to notice. Notice the steep roof shedding snow, the defensive positioning commanding approaches, the layered tapestries trapping heat, the carved symbols protecting and proclaiming. Notice that everything you see was intentional, was designed, was built with purpose and meaning and care. Notice that Skyrim's architecture isn't just beautiful scenery or convenient gameplay space. It's the physical expression of a world, the accumulated wisdom of generations, the practical poetry of survival and belief made manifest in stone and timber and sacred geometry. Notice that all of this was intentional. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see Skyrim differently. Not as levels to complete, but as a place to inhabit. Not as game environment, but as architecture, real, purposeful, and remarkable in its quiet, persistent presence. Sleep well.